there, Twitter. Welcome back. This is The Sit Down, and we are here with actors Ellen Page, Charlie Barnett, and Murray Bartlett, stars of the new Netflix show, Tales of the City. Hi.
Hey.
Hi. How are y'all doing today?
Good.
How are you
doing? I'm good. You know, this is what I was looking forward to on a Monday. I was sitting with y'all. It was really tough getting out of bed today. I was like, they're coming. I watched the show this weekend. We're going to do this. So before you all were cast in the show, how familiar were you with the series?
I've read the book series.
Oh, yeah. I was not really familiar with the series, yeah.
What was
so
it like
I learned so much. A really enjoyable, beautiful experience, and knowing how much it's meant to people, and so many people in my life, particularly people that are older and, you know.
Like me.
Yeah. And, you know, not that we still don't live in a time where it's absolutely crucial for people and difficult for so many people in the community. But, you know, I know, you know, especially then for a lot of my friends, it meant so much.
For sure. And Murray, you mentioned you were aware of it. How important was the series for you when it first debuted?
It had a profound effect on me and people in my life. It was, you know, in the 90s, I actually saw the show in San Francisco the first time that I went to San Francisco in the 90s. So my impressions of San Francisco were like intermingled with the show. And it kind of represented what San Francisco was then. It's changing a little bit now, but this sort of sense of the possibility of community and family. And it felt like that, you know, the books and the TV show felt like that, and the city felt like that. And, you know, that was not the general experience of queer people at that time. So to have a show that was showing that and like speaking to the possibility of that was really kind of groundbreaking and beautiful, and, you know, made you feel hopeful.
Yeah. And so what was it like approaching this work in a more contemporary moment? You know, you mentioned that it was groundbreaking to even imagine queer people living in a space like that, especially as the AIDS epidemic was still raging.
Yeah.
We're in a different place today, but there's still issues we're facing. So how was that different to approach the work today?
God, it's so funny because, you know, we live in kind of a cyclical world, and the same thing come back and back around, same issues. So I feel like a lot of the same principles and words that Armistead gives through these stories, if not just the stories themselves, can still provide that solace or comfort for a lot of the community, myself included. How it's different is so based on San Francisco, I almost want to say. And so much is different.
Yeah. What was it like being in San Francisco doing the show? Because I think I read tweets where, you know, the neighborhood folks would come out and watch you all do the series because they were so excited to see it be renewed again. But it is a very different place than before. So what was it like to kind of navigate this new San Francisco but connect it to its history?
Well, different or not, San Francisco is still incredible, you know, to be said. I'm happy to see its growth. Some of it I'm not in love with.
Obviously, it's such a challenge for it can be such a challenge for the LGBTQ community. You know, you look at the criminalization of homelessness and how much homelessness there now is in San Francisco, because obviously it's become a city for, you know, you know. And so, so I guess for many of the marginalized community, it's a very difficult place to live.
You know what's so beautiful and I think so important about a story like this, and where Armistead's coming from the beginning, is that San Francisco is this resilient city, and that it has become a safe haven for a certain group of minorities, you know what I mean? And through that, it builds a kind of community, courageousness, fight, drive, desire for some change and need. And as sucky as it is to say, like, you know, they're going through a transition point, maybe, through like financial and just the community services. But I'm excited to see how a community like that does rise through it. And they always do.
Yeah.
So.
And speaking of community, I feel as if the cast and the team behind this film was its own community, and it was mostly queer people in that community. What was it like to have that on set every day?
It was amazing, and it was a real sort of mission for the people putting the show together to create this very kind of diverse group of people in the cast and the crew, and it was fantastic because it gave us sort of it gave us all a kind of a common intention, and there was like a real sort of enthusiasm to be there because of that, because it was Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that the show seems to create this beautiful kind of vibe that the show has. It seems to kind of spill out into the world, and that's what happened for me anyway in this show, is that the show is about community and family, and it felt very much like that for me. You know, everyone working on it had a personal investment because they are part of that community. So it was a really wonderful thing. Plus, you know, having a completely queer writers' room meant that the stories that were being told were coming from an authentic place, which was, you know, is very important and, you know, really lifts the show.
Yeah. And speaking of authenticity, what I found amazing about the show is that the racial dynamic that comes out in this new series is way more representative of San Francisco itself. There are lots of people of color represented there. Charlie, what was it like approaching this role, being one of the first main characters to be a person of color?
Look, that being said, and I appreciate it being incorporated, I think there's still a lot further to go. Mm-hmm. I appreciate it so much. I'm of mixed descent, and so that plays a big part in my racial identity. Mm-hmm. And I think in representation, you see a lot of mixed people. You don't see a lot of the dark brothers. You know what I'm saying?
Same man.
You know?
A lot of us.
So I'm hopefully encouraging more and more of that dialogue to come and more of those parts to be seen. But I'm honored and excited and thrilled to be a part of the community and representation. You know, it's needed. So continue.
Yeah. And speaking of other types of representation, where your character takes us through a really interesting conversation around HIV.
Yeah.
What was it like approaching that? Because it felt as if you all were able to use this platform to teach people a lot of things about where HIV is now.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting story to tell at this point, because there's a lot more freedoms sexually for gay men, particularly, in general around HIV. But for my character, who's of a generation who went through the AIDS epidemic, there's a lot of baggage from that time and a lot of trauma. So coming to this kind of new, you know, sort of sexual freedom, I guess you could call it, and different attitude, a new generation that has different attitudes around sex and around safe sex is really challenging, because there's a lot of fear and, you know, fear that's sort of drummed into you through those decades that is really hard to let go of. But it's a beautiful story to tell because we left a lot of that behind, you know, and so it's a you know, a wonderful time and great to be able to tell that story, but also it's complicated, particularly for people of my generation, and that's what our characters kind of navigate through that. Of Charlie's character being of a younger generation and being like, hey, you know, not coming to those conversations and those
the fears too that haven't been kind of instilled in the same way.
Yeah. I mean, I know as a gay man, like in terms of safe sex, the things were drummed into me, and it's very difficult to let that go. You have just this kind of primal kind of fear that's instilled in you, and it's tricky sort of being able to kind of move past that.
And so much of the show I found was exploring the tensions between a younger generation and a newer generation, and was having really hard conversations about those. So you're a couple, you as a couple were having that intimately, but Ellen, your character was very, you know, represented this new generation of young people who have a much more expansive way of thinking about their lives. But you also as an actress have been so open about your own politic. So tell me about what moved you to be more open about talking about politics and how that influenced the role here.
Just in general.
Yeah, in general.
I mean, I feel like the reality is so many members of the community are being so attacked right now, particularly the trans community, to a degree that is extremely horrific and cruel and about life or death. And that's the reality, and it is life and death for so many in terms of the rates of suicide, the rates of homelessness, and the epidemic of trans women of color being murdered.
Violence.
And this continues to be, you know, perpetuated by people in power. And this is not something just in the United States. I've seen it all around the world, making the show Gaycation. So those are the reasons. And I have so much privilege and this platform, and I absolutely need to use it. Absolutely. And this show, I really think will make so many people feel less alone.
Yes.
And then also I'm just grateful to be a part of it because I get to work with actors like this who, you know, bring me to tears even in read-throughs.
Yeah.
So,
Vice versa.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you moved me to tears watching it. You know, I told you before the show, I sat down to begin reviewing the season before we talked, and I just couldn't stop watching. And I think as a queer person of color, it was just incredible to see people that look like me and people that look like my friends. So thank all of you for doing that work every day.
Thank you.
And I think everyone should get excited to see Tales of the City. So thank you for joining us today, and I hope you guys come back.
thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Thanks
thanks so much.
Of course. So Tales of the City premieres on June 7th, which is Friday.